My wife and I give to UCC Milton, both the general fund and for missions and benevolence. We are able to give because we plan for it intentionally. Specifically, we created a savings account entitled Giving, and nearly any money that comes into our possession, paychecks, gifts, tax refunds, etc., we endeavor to place a portion of it into our Giving savings account. Once money is placed in our Giving savings account, it can only be given away to persons in need, to nonprofits, and of course to our church. Giving for me is a habit, one that has been developed over the last 30 years. Back in 1996, at the age of 16, I started my first ever job over the summer, and it paid $6 an hour. I took home $185 per week, and so my parents asked me to put $20 or 10% into the church offering each week. They told me that they had always given, even when they had been tempted not to, and always had more than they needed. Per the old adage, the richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. And for the most part, I have been giving ever since. After I graduated college, I noticed that as I made more money, I found it harder to give that 10%. For the most part, I would do it, but with great reluctance and resentment. 10% was like a magic number to me. If I reached that threshold, I had done my duty. The truth is, I did not want to give, and I only did so out of obligation. About a decade later, in 2007, at the age of 27, I joined a small group at my church, and we would read newspaper articles and talk about them. One article talked about how much money a person needed to make per year to be in the top 1% of the world. Per that article from 2007, if you made $45,000 per year, you were in the top 1% of the world. If you made $70,000, you were in the top 0.1% of the world. The determining factor for being in that top 1% was not one's work ethic or intellect, but the country of your birth. Specifically, if you were born in one of 10 countries, the US being one of them, you were likely to earn an income of at least $45,000 per year and thus be in the top 1% of the world. For context, there are 200 countries in the world, so those 10 countries represented just 5% of all countries. And this got me thinking, if I was in the top 1% of anything, athleticism, intellect, artistic ability, or musical ability, I'd have felt like I won the lottery. But here I was making $90,000, so two times the annual income needed to be in the top 1% per the article, and I did not feel grateful. Even more humbling, whatever role my intellect and work ethic may have played, my income was still primarily due to the sheer luck of being born in the United States, a condition that was entirely outside of my control. And this especially hit close to home for me because I could have been very easily born in India and not the United States. I realized that even if I gave 50% of my total gross income, so about $45,000 a year, I'd still be in the top 1% of the world. And I remember thinking, had I been born into extreme poverty in India, I would wonder why an American person born in the top 0.1% would be hesitant to share half his income if, after doing so, he could still remain in the top 1%. That article devastated me. I was reminded of Luke 21, 1 to 4, where the poor widow who gave her two pennies to the temple was exalted, for she gave all that she had. On the other hand, the rich who gave far more monies to the temple were not exalted because they gave out of their abundance. I was also reminded of the young man from Matthew 19, 21 to 22. Jesus tells the young man that if he seeks to be complete, he should sell his possessions and give his proceeds to the poor, for he would then have treasures in heaven. And in response, the young man departs sadly, because he has great wealth and does not want to part with his possessions. Both stories exemplify radical generosity, effectively giving away everything you have without being fixated on giving a particular percentage out of obligation. I've come to believe radical generosity is the Christian standard for living, but like that young man from Matthew, I do not anticipate ever being courageous enough to meet that standard. But all hope is not lost. While I may be unwilling to give it all away, I can at least endeavor to give more and more often. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis offers the following guidance regarding charity and giving that I have found very helpful. Quote, some people nowadays say that charity ought to be unnecessary and that instead of giving to the poor, we ought to be producing a society in which there were no poor to give to. They may be quite right in saying that we ought to produce this kind of society. But if anyone thinks that as a consequence you can stop giving in the meantime, then he has parted company with all Christian morality. I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, and amusements is up to the standard common among those with similar income to our own, we are probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do but cannot do because our charitable expenditures exclude them. End quote. I do not claim to be an altruist or radically generous person. I continue to struggle with giving and expect to struggle with it for the remainder of my life. But I've simply come to understand and accept that giving should feel uncomfortable because Christian theology is centered upon giving beyond what each of us thinks he or she can afford. Indeed, when giving begins to feel comfortable or easy, I see it as a sign to give more, admittedly reluctantly. And as I engage giving in this more challenging but also more earnest way, I've actually begun to slowly but surely experience less resentment and greater freedom in my attitude and relationship with money. Sometimes I even enjoy the giving, and there is contentment in all of that. Thank you.